Hello and welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. As you settle in for the night, prepare to be immersed in a world of eerie whispers and unsettling tales, designed to both chill and soothe. Now close your eyes, relax, and let the darkness carry you away. And if these nightly tales captivate you, feel free to join our community for more whispered secrets. The job offer came at the perfect time. I had been unemployed for months, my savings were running dangerously low, and the stress of constant rejection emails had begun to take a toll on my sanity. When I got the acceptance letter from Vanguard Solutions, it felt like a miracle. A high-paying position at a well-respected firm, working in a sleek office downtown. It was everything I had been hoping for. From the moment I walked into the building, everything seemed almost too perfect. The 14th floor, where my department was located, was spotless. The office was bright and modern, filled with the quiet hum of computers and the faint scent of fresh coffee. Employees moved efficiently, barely pausing for small talk, their expressions neutral and focused. It was professional, almost eerily so. My manager, Craig Benson, wasted no time with pleasantries. He introduced himself with a curt nod, handed me a neatly organized welcome packet, and gestured toward my cubicle. Read through everything. Follow the procedures exactly. If you have any questions, ask before 5 p.m. After that, I don't check emails. The way he said it struck me as odd. The wording was precise, almost rehearsed. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a rule. At the time, I assumed it was just a workplace quirk, an unspoken expectation to maintain efficiency. But I would soon learn that it wasn't about efficiency at all. It was about something much stranger. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. I followed Craig's instructions to the letter, kept my head down, and tried to adjust to the unusual culture of the office. There were no after-work happy hours, no lingering at each other's desks for casual conversation. People arrived exactly at 8:30 a.m. and left exactly at 5:45 p.m., as if operating on an invisible schedule. And then there were the elevators. They were slow, too slow, taking just a little too long to arrive whenever I pressed the button. Every time the doors slid open, there was a slight delay, a moment of hesitation, almost as if the building itself was thinking about letting me leave. I tried to ignore it. Corporate buildings were weird sometimes. But then one night I received an email that changed everything. I had stayed late, something that no one else ever seemed to do. I was finishing up a project when a notification popped up on my screen. The timestamp read 9:17 p.m. From Peter L. Subject: working late? You shouldn't stay in the office alone. It's not safe. I blinked at the screen. Who the hell was Peter L.? I hadn't met anyone by that name, and I had gone through the company directory enough times to be certain there was no one here with that name. I quickly typed a response. Who are you? No reply. A few minutes passed, and then, right in front of my eyes, the email vanished. I checked my inbox. Gone. I checked my trash folder. Nothing. It was as if the message had never existed in the first place. A cold chill settled over me. I pushed away from my desk and glanced around the office. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above me, casting an artificial glow over the empty rows of desks. I was alone. At least, I thought I was. The uneasy feeling stayed with me the entire night. The next morning, the first thing I did was go to Craig's office. Hey, I said casually, leaning against the doorframe. Do we have a Peter L. on the team? Craig froze. For a moment he didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me. Then, without a word, he grabbed his phone and dialed someone. This conversation is over, he said coldly. Close the door behind you. A shiver ran down my spine. That wasn't normal. Craig knew something. He knew exactly what I was asking about, and he wanted me to drop it. I went back to my desk, my mind racing. This wasn't just an email glitch. This wasn't just some weird office rule. This was something much bigger. That night, I left work exactly on time. I told myself I would forget about the email, that I wouldn't check anything after hours. But just as I was about to fall asleep, my phone vibrated. A new email. From Peter L. Subject: they know. They're watching you now. Stop looking. I dropped my phone. For the first time since starting at Vanguard Solutions, I realized I had made a mistake. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing over my bed, watching, waiting. The email from Peter L. replayed in my mind over and over again. They're watching you now. Stop looking. Who is watching me? Why was I suddenly a target? By morning, my paranoia had bloomed into full-fledged anxiety. My apartment felt wrong, like someone had been inside while I was sleeping. Nothing was missing, but something was off. A drawer slightly open. A pen I didn't remember placing on my nightstand. The unsettling sense that my belongings had been moved. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I arrived at the office, I knew immediately that something had changed. Everyone was staring at me. Not openly, not obviously, but I could feel their eyes flicker toward me in quick, almost nervous glances. As if I had suddenly become an outsider, someone who had broken an unspoken rule. I forced myself to act normal. I grabbed coffee, sat at my desk, and pretended I wasn't unraveling inside. Then Craig called me into his office. I swallowed hard and forced a smile as I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. Craig didn't return my smile. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled together, eyes cold and unreadable. "Are you adjusting well to the company?" he asked. I hesitated. The question felt loaded. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Everything's been great." Craig studied me, as if assessing whether I was telling the truth. Then he leaned forward slightly. "You stayed late last night." It wasn't a question. I shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, I was just finishing up some work." He nodded slowly. "That won't be happening again, will it?" There was no threat in his tone, but somehow, it still felt like one. "I know," I stammered. "Of course not." "Good," Craig said, leaning back in his chair. "I'd hate for you to," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Get overwhelmed. We value a healthy work-life balance here." There was something deeply unsettling about the way he said it. The meeting was over before I could ask anything. I stepped out of his office, my mind spinning. He knew. About Peter L. About the email. About everything. And he wanted me to shut up. I spent the rest of the day forcing myself to focus on work, ignoring the quiet murmurs behind my back. Ignoring the way no one looked me directly in the eye anymore. Then, at exactly 5:30 p.m., something strange happened. The office emptied. People vanished from their desks in perfect synchronization. The sound of clicking keyboards and murmured phone calls ceased all at once. I glanced around, suddenly aware that no one was lingering behind. By 5:45 p.m., I was alone, and that's when I heard it. A noise, faint at first. A soft, wet tapping like something dripping onto the floor. My pulse hammered in my ears. I turned toward the far end of the office, where the break room was located. The lights in that section were already dimmed, but I could make out something near the floor. A dark, slick trail leading toward the hallway. Blood. My stomach lurched. I hesitated, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. But I had to know. I had to see. I stepped forward, heart pounding, my shoes barely making a sound against the carpet. The trail led to a closed supply closet. Something moved inside. A shuffle. A ragged breath. I clenched my fists, preparing myself for whatever was behind the door. Then, just as I reached for the handle, my phone vibrated. I jumped, nearly dropping it. My shaking fingers fumbled as I pulled it from my pocket. A new email. From Peter L. Subject: "Don't open it. Walk away. Now." I froze. My eyes darted back to the door, my heartbeat thundering. Something pressed against the other side. A soft, deliberate knock. Once. Twice. 3 times. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to grab my things. I sprinted down the hallway, past the rows of empty desks, past the silent conference rooms. The elevator was still agonizingly slow, but I didn't wait for it. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering in my chest. By the time I burst out of the building into the cool night air, I was gasping for breath. My hands were trembling. My entire body was shaking. What the hell was that? Who, or what, was in that supply closet? And more importantly, why had Peter L. tried to stop me from opening it? I stood outside the building for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. The office windows above me were completely dark. It was as if no one had ever been inside at all. I checked my phone again. The email was still there. I typed out a reply. "Who are you?" No response. I stared up at the building one last time before I turned and walked away. I had the overwhelming feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something terrible. But deep down I knew this wasn't over. I didn't go to work the next day. I told myself I needed time to process everything that had happened. The strange email, Craig's cryptic warning, the blood-stained floor, and, most unsettling of all, the thing in the supply closet. I spent the entire morning refreshing my inbox, waiting for another email from Peter L. Nothing. I checked my phone at least 50 times, convinced that at any moment, I'd receive another chilling message. But my inbox remained empty. By noon, paranoia had settled deep into my bones. I couldn't sit still. I kept glancing at the windows, feeling as if someone was watching me from the street below. My apartment, usually a place of comfort, felt compromised. By 2 p.m., I had convinced myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe I had just imagined things in the office. Maybe stress and exhaustion had made me hallucinate. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. By 4 p.m., I was pacing my apartment, debating whether or not I should go back to work. And by 4:30 p.m., I made a terrible mistake. I went back. The office was exactly as I had left it, eerily empty. I stepped inside cautiously, half expecting someone to jump out at me. But there was nothing. No voices. No murmurs of conversation. Just the hollow silence of a building that should have been full of life. My footsteps echoed as I walked past rows of cubicles. My desk was just as I had left it, my coffee mug still half full, my monitor still displaying yesterday's work. I hesitated, staring at my chair. This was a bad idea. I should leave. Right now. Then I heard it. The tapping. My breath caught in my throat. The same slow, wet tapping I had heard the night before. I turned toward the hallway. The break room lights were dimmed again. The supply closet door was shut. But the trail, the dark, slick trail, was still there. It had dried slightly, but the stain remained, leading directly to that closed door. I took a step forward, then another. Something in me wanted to see. I had to know what was inside. I reached the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I turned it slowly. The door creaked open. And inside, nothing. The closet was empty. No blood. No body. Just neatly stacked office supplies and a few extra chairs. I exhaled sharply, almost laughing at myself. Maybe I really had imagined everything. I turned to leave, and froze. There was a sound behind me, a slow, deliberate inhale. I felt my stomach drop. I wasn't alone. The air shifted. A presence, something unseen but undeniable, filled the space behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My entire body was paralyzed with fear. Then I heard a voice. A whisper. So close it brushed against my ear. "Why did you come back?" I ran. I sprinted out of the break room, past the cubicles, down the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I slammed into the stairwell door, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for breath. The street was crowded, full of people heading home from work, chatting, laughing, living their normal, uncomplicated lives. I bent over, trying to slow my breathing. My hands were shaking. Then my phone vibrated. I swallowed hard and pulled it from my pocket. A new email. From Peter L. Subject, they know. You shouldn't have gone back. Now it's too late. I felt a deep, cold dread settle into my bones. I turned back toward the office. And that's when I saw him. Craig. Standing on the other side of the street. Watching me. His face was blank, unreadable. But his eyes, they were wrong. Something in them wasn't human. Then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. And I knew. I had made a terrible mistake. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Craig's smile. That slow, deliberate expression that didn't quite belong to a human face. His eyes empty, cold, too aware. I locked my doors. Checked them twice. 3 times. But it didn't help. The paranoia had settled deep inside me, spreading like a poison. I wasn't safe. I could feel it. And then, at 3:14 a.m., my phone vibrated. I hesitated before picking it up. Another email. From Peter L. Subject, he's watching. Don't open your blinds. Don't look outside. My blood turned to ice. I stared at my phone, my hands clammy with sweat. Slowly, as if in a trance, I turned my head toward my window. The curtains were shut. But I felt it. Someone was on the other side. Watching. Waiting. I held my breath. Then, a tap. Soft. Gentle. Just once. Then again. Tap. Tap. A slow, patient rhythm. I gripped my phone, trying not to make a sound. Tap. Tap. I wanted to move, to grab my keys, to run, but I couldn't. The tapping continued. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't frantic. Whoever, whatever, was on the other side of my window wasn't trying to scare me. It was waiting. A sick realization settled over me. This wasn't a random attack. It was a game, and I had already lost. I don't know how long I stayed frozen in my bed, staring at the curtains. Minutes? Hours? The tapping never stopped. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it ended. Silence. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then my phone vibrated again. I didn't want to look, but I did. From Peter L. Subject: don't let them in. If they knock, you're already dead. Knock. The sound came from my front door. I almost screamed. My hands clamped over my mouth as my body went stiff. Knock. Slow. Measured. They weren't trying to force their way in. They wanted me to answer. A cruel game. A twisted joke. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering against my ribs. I won't answer. I won't answer. I won't. My phone vibrated again. Another email. From Peter L. Subject: you don't understand. They don't need you to open the door. My stomach twisted. My ears strained, desperate to hear if the knocking had stopped. And then, footsteps. Not outside. Not at the door. Inside. Someone was in my apartment. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body was locked in place, every muscle frozen in terror. The footsteps, slow, deliberate, moved across my apartment floor. Not hurried. Not frantic. They knew I was awake. I could hear them breathing. Shallow. Too calm. Too steady. My fingers clenched the edge of my blanket as my mind raced. What do I do? The front door was across the room. My phone was still in my hands, but my fingers were slick with sweat. If I made a sound, if I even breathed too loud, would they react? I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. Then, another email. My phone vibrated in my hands, and I almost dropped it. The footsteps stopped. Silence. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I could feel them standing behind me, watching, waiting. Slowly, without shifting my body, I lowered my gaze to the screen. From Peter L. Subject: you have 30 seconds. Don't run to the door. Don't fight them. There's only one way out. What the hell did that mean? I wanted to type back. What do I do? But I knew I didn't have time. My pulse thundered in my ears as I thought fast. One way out. My window. The apartment was on the second floor. It was a drop, but better than whatever the hell was in here with me. The thought had barely formed before the footsteps moved again. Closer. I had seconds left. I launched from my bed. I didn't care about noise anymore. I ripped the curtains open, unlocked the window with shaking fingers, and shoved it upward. Cold night air hit my face. Behind me, a whisper. Don't go yet. No. I jumped. The fall wasn't graceful. My feet hit the ground, but my balance gave out, and I collapsed into the pavement. My hands scraped against rough concrete, but I was alive. I gasped, sucking in air, already scrambling to my feet. Above me, in my window, a figure, standing perfectly still, watching me. I didn't stop. I ran. I didn't go home that night. I didn't stop running until I reached the gas station 3 blocks away, where I collapsed against the glass doors, barely able to breathe. The clerk, some teenager in a uniform vest, stared at me wide-eyed as I stumbled inside. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My body was shaking too violently, my thoughts scrambled. What was that thing in my apartment? My phone vibrated again. Slowly, dreading what I'd see, I looked down. From Peter L. Subject: you did good. They won't follow you tonight. Tonight? I swallowed, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't safe. This wasn't over. Not even close. I sat in the gas station for hours. At first, I was too shaken to move, barely able to catch my breath as my body trembled from the surge of adrenaline. I kept staring at the entrance, expecting that figure, whatever the hell it was, to step inside at any moment. But it never did. The kid behind the counter kept watching me, shifting awkwardly as if trying to decide whether to call the cops or just ignore me. I wanted to tell him I was fine, but that was a lie, and the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat, waiting. thinking, because this wasn't over. Not even close. I pulled my phone out, my hands still unsteady, and opened my inbox. Peter L. Whoever they were, had been right. If I had run for the door, I probably wouldn't have made it. That thing had been right behind me. What did he mean, though? They won't follow you tonight. So, what about tomorrow? I stayed at the gas station until the sky started to lighten. The kid working the register gave up on watching me and turned his attention back to his phone. By the time the morning clerk came in and gave me a suspicious glance, I knew I had to leave. But where the hell was I supposed to go? I didn't have friends in this city. I'd moved here for work, and my social life had been non-existent. I could call the cops, but what would I even tell them? Hey, there was something in my apartment. No, I don't know who. No, I don't know what. But someone on the internet told me to jump out my window. And I did, and now I think I'm being hunted. Yeah, no. They'd write me off as some lunatic having a breakdown. I needed more information first. So I did the only thing that made sense. I found a cheap hotel on the other side of town, paid in cash, and locked myself in. Then I started digging. I went through every email from Peter L., rereading them, looking for details I'd missed. The timestamps weren't consistent. Some messages had been sent before my weird Tinder date had even ended. That meant whoever Peter was, they weren't just reacting to my messages in real time. They already knew what was happening. Or worse, they knew before it happened. My hands felt clammy as I checked the email address. It was random looking, a mix of letters and numbers like a burner account. No social media linked to it. No profile picture. Nothing. I took a deep breath and typed. Who are you? How did you know what was going to happen? I hit send. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. From Peter L. Subject. Stop asking the wrong questions. You need to prepare for tomorrow night. My stomach sank. Tomorrow night. I stared at the email for a long time, dread curling in my gut. I didn't want to know what was coming, but pretending it wasn't real wouldn't help me. I had to prepare. I started small. 1 weapons. I wasn't going into this unarmed. I didn't own a gun, but I went out and bought a hunting knife, something sturdy. Not much, but better than nothing. 2 surveillance. If I was being hunted, I needed to see it coming. I bought a cheap security camera, the kind that linked to my phone. I set it up outside the hotel room door. 3 backup plan. I found the fire escape. Timed how long it would take me to get out. I wasn't going to be trapped again. The entire time, my mind kept circling back to one question. What the hell was after me? I had barely survived the night before. If it came back stronger, faster, what chance did I have? My phone buzzed again. From Peter L. Subject. You won't win this fight. If it finds you tomorrow, you won't be fast enough. Don't try to fight. Don't try to run. I felt cold all over. Then what the hell was I supposed to do? The next day dragged. I didn't leave the hotel room. I barely ate. I stayed glued to the security feed, watching the hallway, waiting for anything to appear. Nothing did. By the time the sun started to set, my nerves were so frayed that even the sound of footsteps outside made my stomach clench. Then, 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. From Peter L. Subject. It's here. Check the camera. Don't open the door. My pulse spiked as I grabbed my phone and opened the feed. At first, I didn't see anything. The hallway looked normal. Empty. I frowned, scanned the screen, and then I saw it. Not a person. Not an animal. Something else. It was standing just at the edge of the hallway light, too still. Too wrong. I couldn't see its face. I wasn't even sure if it had a face, but its head turned slowly, like it knew I was watching. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. Then the doorknob rattled. I slapped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Don't let it hear you. Another email. From Peter L. Subject. You have 10 seconds. Look under the bed. What? I didn't question it. I dropped to the floor and threw back the blanket. There. A hatch in the floor. What the hell was a hatch doing in a hotel room? Another rattle. A whisper on the other side of the door. I didn't wait. I yanked the hatch open and dropped down. Just as the door burst open, I hit the floor below hard, knocking the breath from my lungs. My ears rang from the impact, but I forced myself to move, to crawl forward in the dark. Above me, I heard it step inside. Heavy. Deliberate. It knew I was here. It was looking for me. My phone buzzed in my hand. From Peter L. Subject. Do not make a sound. I pressed my back against the cold ground and held my breath. Above me, something moved. I squeezed my eyes shut. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. A pause. Then, a whisper. I see you. The first time I saw the black sedan, I didn't think anything of it. It was parked across the street from my apartment, just sitting there, the windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I barely noticed it as I walked past, digging through my purse for my keys. I should have noticed. I should have been paying attention. Because that night, when I left my friend's party and called a rideshare, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. And I got in. I had been drinking, not enough to be completely out of it, but enough that my mind was a little foggy. My phone screen was too bright in the dark as I double-checked the notification. Your ride has arrived. Black sedan. License plate ending in 9F3. I looked up at the car in front of me. Black sedan. License plate ending in 9F3. I yanked the handle and slid into the back seat. The driver didn't say anything. He didn't ask my name, but that wasn't unusual. Some drivers just wanted to get through their shift without talking. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly. I exhaled and leaned my head back against the seat. Outside, the city lights blurred past. My head felt heavy. I just wanted to get home and crawl into bed. The driver still wasn't talking. The silence in the car felt thick, the only sound the soft hum of the engine. Something felt off. I shifted uncomfortably and glanced at my phone again. ETA, 14 minutes. I looked up at the driver. He was staring at me through the rearview mirror. My skin prickled. I tried to act normal, my fingers tightening around my phone as my mind raced. Why was he watching me? Maybe he was just checking the mirror. Maybe I was imagining things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked down at my app again. Route calculating. What? I refreshed the screen. The little blue line showing my route home had disappeared. Instead, the car icon was moving away from my neighborhood. We're going the wrong way, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The driver didn't respond. My stomach clenched. Hey! Click. The door's locked. I felt the blood drain from my face. What the hell? I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My breath came fast. Hey, let me out. No answer. The car sped up. The city lights were gone now, replaced by dark streets and empty roads. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. This wasn't a wrong turn. I wasn't going home. I was being taken. The air inside the car thickened with silence. My pulse pounded in my ears, each beat growing louder as I yanked at the door handle again. Still locked. My breathing grew shallow, panic crawling up my throat like a living thing. The driver still hadn't spoken a single word. The wrong turn could have been an accident, a technical glitch, a mistake. But the locked doors? That was intentional. I forced myself to think. Don't panic. Figure this out. I looked at my phone again, but the app still showed nothing but a blank screen, my destination wiped away. No service. I tried again. No service. I need to get out of this car. I shifted in my seat, eyes darting around. Outside, the streets had changed. We weren't downtown anymore. No sidewalks, no traffic lights. The buildings had thinned out, replaced by long stretches of road and trees. We were leaving the city. I turned to the driver, voice sharper now. Where are we going? No answer. I swallowed hard. Hey, I said, where the hell are we going? Nothing. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. Too tight, too controlled. I reached forward and slammed my fist against his seat. Let me out. No reaction. I reached for the window controls. Disabled. My stomach flipped. Okay, think. I forced myself to breathe. If I panic, I lose. I scanned the inside of the car, searching for something, anything, that could help me. The car was too clean. No trash, no loose objects. No sign that this was just another rideshare driver going through his night shift. That's when I saw it. The missing dashboard sticker. Every rideshare car was supposed to have one. Somewhere on the windshield or dashboard, a decal with the company's logo. This car didn't have one. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This isn't my ride. My breath hitched. He must have changed his plates. Somehow, some way, he had known my ride was arriving and had matched the details. My chest tightened as the realization crashed over me. I had gotten into a stranger's car. I slid my hand toward my phone, fingers shaking as I tried to open my dialer. Maybe I could still call 911. Even without service, sometimes emergency calls could still go through. Before I could even press the button, the driver's hand moved. Fast. His arm shot to the center console, hitting a switch near the dashboard. I heard a metallic clunk. The child lock. He had just made sure I wasn't getting out. The air in my lungs vanished. This was real. This was happening. I had seconds to act. I shoved my phone into my jacket pocket and shifted forward, bracing my hands against the back of the driver's seat. If I could reach for the steering wheel, make him crash, maybe I could force him to stop. The car jerked. Hard. I was thrown back against the seat as the driver veered to the right, tires screeching against the asphalt. I grabbed onto the door to steady myself, my heart hammering. The driver finally spoke. "You don't want to do that." His voice was flat, emotionless. I froze. He didn't turn around, didn't look at me, just kept driving. Steady, controlled, like he had done this before. I needed a weapon. I dug into my purse, my fingers flying over everything inside. Lip balm, receipts, my wallet, keys. My hands closed around them. I shifted the keys between my fingers, lining them up so the metal poked out between my knuckles. Not much, but better than nothing. If he stopped this car, I would fight. My throat was dry as I forced my voice to stay calm. Play along. Act like you're not scared. "You don't have to do this," I said, gripping the keys tighter. No response. "Whatever you want, I won't fight you. Just let me out. I won't say anything. Nothing." He drove faster. The trees blurred past the window, the dark road stretching ahead of us like a tunnel. No lights. No turns. My stomach twisted. Then, the car slowed. Just slightly. But enough. Enough for me to realize. We were here. Wherever here was. The driver let out a slow breath. And then, for the first time since I got into the car, he turned around. The driver turned slowly, his face barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard. For the first time, I saw his eyes, cold, distant, like he was looking through me rather than at me. No rage. No excitement. Just purpose. My grip on the keys tightened until the metal dug into my palm. "Let me out." My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "Let me out right now." His lips twitched. Not a smile. Not a frown. Something worse. Like he was amused. Like he had heard this before. I lunged. I didn't think. I just moved, throwing myself forward, aiming straight for his face. My arm swung, the keys slicing through the air. But he was faster. His hand shot up, grabbing my wrist in a bruising grip. My breath hitched as pain flared through my arm. Then his other hand moved. I saw the glint of something silver before I felt it. A blade, thin and sharp, pressing just under my chin. I froze. The car idled, the rumble of the engine the only sound in the air. We weren't moving anymore. A single thought slammed into my brain. If I don't get out now, I never will. He held the knife steady, close enough to make my skin prickle, but not close enough to cut. Yet, the road outside was empty, a stretch of dirt and gravel surrounded by thick trees. No streetlights, no buildings, just darkness. The last thing I remembered before my ride was supposed to end was that we were still in the city. Now, I had no idea where I was. The driver let out a slow breath. "You picked the wrong car." His voice was low, measured, like he was in control. Like I was nothing more than another mistake someone else had made before me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. Don't freeze. Don't give up. I was still alive. That meant I had options. I shifted slightly, feeling the weight of my phone in my jacket pocket. If I could get to it, if I could hit the emergency dial. The knife pressed in just slightly. Enough to make me stop. His head tilted, his eyes flicking downward as if he knew what I was thinking. Don't. One word. Calm. Firm. Final. I clenched my teeth. My pulse hammered against my skin, my brain scrambling for anything, any way out. And then, I saw it. His hand was still on my wrist. His focus was split. One hand controlling my movements, the other holding the knife. He was strong, but he wasn't expecting me to fight. I dropped my weight. Suddenly, I was no longer resisting. I was going down, fast, twisting my arm as I fell. The motion caught him off guard, making his grip slip just slightly. Enough. I yanked my hand free and threw my body sideways, shoving my shoulder against the door with all my strength. It didn't budge. The child lock. Damn it. But I didn't stop. I kicked. Hard. The heel of my shoe slammed against the center console, knocking the gear shift. The car jerked, rolling slightly as the transmission struggled to correct itself. For the first time, he hesitated, and that was all I needed. I spun back around, both hands on the steering wheel, and yanked it to the left. The car lurched. Tires screeched against the dirt road. He cursed, his knife hand flailing as the car spun. I felt the impact before I saw it. Metal against wood, the car slamming into the tree line. Then silence. I gasped for breath, my chest heaving, my body shaking from the impact. Smoke curled from the hood of the car. The air reeked of burnt rubber. The driver wasn't moving. His body slumped forward, the side of his head smacking against the wheel. Now, I lunged for the lock. The click of the mechanism was the best sound I had ever heard. I shoved the door open and threw myself out of the car. The cold hit me instantly, a stark contrast to the panic burning inside me. I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't think. Just ran. The ground was uneven, my feet stumbling over roots and loose rocks. I didn't care. I just knew I had to get as far away from that car as possible. The trees loomed tall and unfamiliar, branches shifting in the wind, shadows twisting around me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my breaths ragged. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was gone. The car was still there, wrecked, smoking, but the driver's seat was empty. A chill shot down my spine. He was somewhere out here, and I was still alone. I forced myself forward, ignoring the sharp ache in my legs. My body screamed at me to stop, to catch my breath, but I couldn't. Not until I was safe. Not until I was far enough away. Then, through the darkness, I saw it. A light. A house. A gas station. It didn't matter. I ran faster. The ground blurred beneath me. Almost there. Almost. A branch snapped behind me. I froze. My breath hitched. Slowly, I turned my head, and in the darkness, I saw him, standing between the trees, watching, waiting. A slow smile curled over his lips. He took a step forward. I took a step back. Then, he whispered one word, a word that made my blood run cold. Run. The night felt colder now, or maybe it was just me. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the man standing between the trees. The way he stood there, motionless, like a shadow that had always been there, waiting for me to notice. His whisper still echoed in my mind. Run. I didn't move. Not at first. Because some part of me, some stupid, hopeful part, was still waiting for this to be some kind of sick joke. But then he moved. Slow. Deliberate. Like he had all the time in the world. A single step closer. Then another. And just like that, my body snapped out of its shock. I turned and sprinted. The forest was a maze of darkness and noise. Twigs cracked beneath my feet, branches scraped at my arms. I didn't stop. I could hear him behind me. Not running, walking. Like he was enjoying this. Like he knew I had nowhere to go. But he was wrong. There was a light ahead. A flickering glow through the trees. I forced my legs to move faster, ignoring the stitch in my side, ignoring the way my lungs burned with every breath. I was so close now. I reached a break in the trees and stumbled onto a gravel road. The light was coming from a house. Not a gas station. Not a store. A small, single-story house sitting at the edge of the woods, its porch light buzzing in the night. I didn't care who lived there. I just knew it was my only chance. I ran up the steps and slammed my fist against the door. Help! Please, you have to help me. My voice was raw. No answer. I pounded on the door again, harder this time. Still nothing. No. I turned, scanning the windows. The inside was dark. No movement, no sign of anyone at all. Was it abandoned? Behind me, the sound of crunching gravel. I whipped around. He was standing at the end of the driveway. Just standing there. Watching. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted. It didn't move. Locked. Come on, come on. I tried again, jiggling the handle, shoving my shoulder against the wood. Nothing. Behind me, the gravel crunched again. I spun back around, and he was closer now, halfway up the driveway. Not running, just walking, like he knew this would end exactly how he wanted it to. I sucked in a breath, my mind screaming for a plan, anything. And then, the porch light flickered. A sound. From inside the house. Someone was in there. I wasn't alone. I slammed my fist against the wood again, harder this time. Please. I need help. Someone's following me. A long second passed. Then the deadbolt clicked. The door creaked open just slightly, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. A voice low and unfamiliar. Come in. I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me. And that was when I realized I had just made a mistake. The moment the door slammed shut, the world outside was gone. The only thing left was darkness. And silence. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to see who had let me in. But the house was pitch black. I took a shaky step forward. Hello. No response. The air felt wrong. Heavy. Stagnant. Like no one had lived here in a long time. I swallowed hard, my eyes straining to adjust. The door was behind me. The man was outside. I could still turn around. I could still. A click. The unmistakable sound of a lock sliding into place. I whirled around, my breath catching in my throat. A shadow moved in front of me. Tall. Still. Waiting. Whoever had let me in was standing right there. I took a step back. Another. I reached for the doorknob, but my fingers only brushed cold metal. A chain lock. A deadbolt. A second lock. They had locked me in. I turned back to the figure, my voice barely a whisper. Please. I need help. Someone's out there. He was following me. Silence. Then finally, the voice again. You shouldn't have come here. A chill crawled up my spine. Something about the way they said it. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just final. Like this had been planned. Like they had been waiting. A faint light flickered on. A single dim bulb from the ceiling. And I finally saw them. An older man, maybe in his 60s. Pale skin. Sunken eyes. He stared at me like he already knew everything. Like he had been expecting me. Behind me, outside, a shadow moved past the window. The man from the woods. He was still out there. Still watching. And I was trapped inside. I took a step back. I need to get out of here, I said. The old man didn't move. You don't understand, he murmured. His voice was quiet, flat. If you go back out there now, you won't make it. Not this time. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean, this time? His face darkened. And that was when he said something I would never forget. You're not the first. Not the first. My heart slammed against my ribs. What are you talking about? The man sighed, as if he had already accepted whatever this was. As if this always happened. They always come here, he muttered. Running. Begging. Thinking this place will save them. He looked up, locking eyes with me. It never does. Outside, the shadow moved again. Closer. The porch light buzzed, flickered, then died. Total darkness. I turned back to the man. You have to let me out. His expression didn't change. You don't get it, he whispered. And then, something knocked at the door. Once. Twice. Slow. Deliberate. I froze. The old man's eyes widened slightly. It's too late now. The knocking came again. A pause. Then, a voice. From the other side of the door. The same voice I had heard in the woods. Let me in. The knock at the door sent a violent shiver down my spine. Once. Twice. A pause. Then that voice. Let me in. My breath caught in my throat. The sound was too familiar. The same voice I had heard back in the woods. Smooth. Low. Patient. I turned to the old man. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. You have to help me, I whispered. Please. He didn't answer. I took a step forward. Why won't you help me? His gaze flickered to the door, his lips pressing into a thin line. I told you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You shouldn't have come here. The air in the room felt thick. Too still. Then another knock. Louder this time. Bang. 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 The sound rattled through the tiny house. A slow, suffocating silence followed. Then, the doorknob turned. I backed away fast, slamming into the old man's small wooden table. A ceramic bowl crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces. My pulse was racing so hard it felt like my entire body was vibrating. The old man barely reacted. I grabbed his wrist. Help me do something. He stared at the door. Click. My stomach plummeted. That was the sound of the deadbolt unlocking. but neither of us had touched it. I whipped around just in time to see the chain lock slowly slide loose from the hook. Something was unlocking the door from the outside. The old man took a sharp breath. His fingers twitched. Then, in a sudden movement, he grabbed my arm and yanked me backward, pulling me toward the kitchen. "Stay away from the door," he muttered under his breath. "If it gets in, we're done." I barely had time to process what he meant before. The door creaked open. The room beyond was black. Nothing but emptiness. A void. But I could hear something. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Then a whisper. "You shouldn't have run." The old man moved fast. He shoved me behind him, his face tight with panic. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice suddenly urgent. "No matter what happens, do not let it touch you." "What is it?" I demanded. He didn't answer. I could feel it now, a presence. Not just a person, but something wrong. Something old. Something that had done this before. The figure stepped inside. I still couldn't see it clearly. It was like a smudge on reality. A shape that flickered between the shadows, its outline never quite right. Then it spoke again. "You never should have left the woods." The voice didn't come from its mouth. It was everywhere. A deep, grating sound that scratched the inside of my skull. I winced, clenched my teeth. The old man reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, rusted knife. It looked old. Too old. Like something from another century. "Don't move," he whispered. Then he lunged. I barely had time to react. The old man slashed forward, the knife slicing through air. And the thing let out a sound. A horrible, distorted shriek. The air rippled around it, the shape flickering like a glitch in reality. Then it moved, faster than I could process. One moment it was near the doorway. The next it was inches from my face. And I could finally see it. It had no eyes. Only dark, hollow holes where they should have been. Its face was stretched and wrong, like skin pulled too tight over a skull. Its mouth was too wide, too long, and when it spoke again, the voice was softer. "You've been marked." A cold hand clamped onto my wrist. The room spun. Everything flashed white. And then, I woke up somewhere else. The air was thick with fog. I wasn't in the old man's house anymore. I was outside, in the woods. My wrist burned. I looked down and froze. There was something on my skin, a mark. Deep black lines, almost like a brand. Then I heard it. The whisper. Right behind me. "I told you. You can't run." And this time I believed it. The soft hum of conversation filled the air as Violet stirred her coffee. The clinking of the spoon against the porcelain cup blending into the gentle ambience of the upscale cafe. She took a slow sip, glancing at the time on her phone. 7:52 p.m. He was late. Her fingers tapped idly on the table as she gazed out the window at the blurred city lights. It wasn't unusual for first dates to start off with a bit of tardiness, but something about the delay made her uneasy. Maybe it was because she had been so hesitant to try dating again. Maybe it was the way her last relationship had left her more paranoid than she cared to admit. Either way, she felt that familiar twist in her stomach, the one that warned her when something was off. Just as she was about to pull up a casual exit excuse on her phone, a figure appeared at the door. Tall, dressed in a crisp navy button-up and dark jeans, Henry looked just as good as his profile suggested. His smile was warm, apologetic, as he spotted her and made his way over. "Violet, I'm so sorry I'm late," he said as he sat across from her. Traffic was a nightmare. She smiled politely, though the warning bells in her head were still faintly chiming. "No worries. I was just about to text you." Their conversation started easily enough. Henry was charming, well-spoken, and attentive. He asked all the right questions, responded with thoughtful answers, and made her laugh more than once. He worked in tech, had recently moved to the city, and was an only child. Everything seemed normal, pleasant even, and yet something still didn't sit right with her. Maybe it was the way his eyes darted around the room every few minutes, as if scanning for someone. Maybe it was the way he occasionally paused before answering her questions, like he was carefully constructing his responses. Or maybe it was the way he leaned just a little too close whenever he spoke, as if he were hyper-focused on every word coming from her lips. Then came the moment that cemented her unease. Violet excused herself to the restroom, needing a brief reprieve to gather her thoughts. When she returned, she noticed Henry had moved her phone closer to his side of the table. She picked it up casually, her heart suddenly beating a little faster. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice light but her grip tightening on the device. Henry smiled, unfazed. "Yeah, just noticed your screen lit up. Thought it might be an emergency." That was when she saw it, the subtle shift in his expression. The smallest flicker of something darker, something calculated. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his easy charm, but Violet had seen it. She knew better than to ignore her instincts. "That's sweet of you," she replied smoothly, forcing herself to relax. But it was probably just a notification. As their date wrapped up, Henry offered to walk her home. She declined with a polite smile, insisting she had parked nearby. He didn't press, but she could feel his eyes on her as she left the cafe. Even when she reached her car, her fingers trembled as she unlocked the door. It was only when she was safely inside, engine running, that she allowed herself to breathe. Something about Henry wasn't right, and she was going to find out exactly what it was. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Violet's apartment, but sleep had evaded her. She had spent most of the night tossing and turning, her mind circling around Henry's strange behavior and the unsettling way he had reacted to her mentioning his past. Something was off, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into something much darker than a simple bad date. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, she powered up her laptop and did what she had promised herself she wouldn't. She searched for any trace of Henry online. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, typing his full name into multiple search engines. At first, nothing significant appeared, just a few outdated social media accounts, an old high school yearbook photo, and a LinkedIn profile that seemed eerily barren. But the more she dug, the stranger things became. There were gaps in his online presence, entire years where he seemed to have vanished. Violet frowned. In today's digital world, everyone left a trace. So why did Henry seem to exist in fragmented pieces, as if someone had scrubbed parts of his life away? Then, she stumbled upon something that sent a shiver down her spine. A deep dive into old newspaper archives brought her to an article from a town several hours away, dated 10 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman goes missing after dispute with boyfriend." Her heart pounded as she skimmed the article. The missing woman, Sarah Evans, had last been seen arguing with her boyfriend, a man described as charming but secretive by her friends. No charges had ever been filed, and the case had eventually gone cold. But it was the photo attached to the article that made Violet's blood run cold. The man in the picture wasn't named, only referred to as a person of interest, but she recognized him instantly. The sharp jawline, the same piercing gaze, the unmistakable air of confidence. It was Henry. Violet's hands trembled as she clicked through other related articles, hoping to prove herself wrong. But no matter how much she tried to deny it, the evidence was undeniable. Henry had been involved in the disappearance of a woman. A sickening wave of nausea washed over her. Was she sitting on the verge of something truly terrifying? Was she, without knowing it, entangled in the web of a man who had gotten away with something sinister? Her breath came in shallow gasps as she shut her laptop, shoving it away as if it burned her fingertips. She had to think. She had to be rational. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Henry just looked like the man in the photo. But deep down, she knew better. Violet grabbed her phone and opened her messages. "Hey, Henry," she typed, hesitating before adding, "Want to grab coffee later?" Her pulse raced as she hit send. She needed to see him again, but this time, she wouldn't be the one answering questions. She'd be the one asking them. The days following Violet's unsettling discovery at Henry's apartment were a blur of tension and forced smiles. She told herself she was overreacting, that maybe she had misunderstood the whole situation. But the weight of unease clung to her, a whisper in the back of her mind that refused to be silenced. Henry, of course, was as charming as ever. He called her in the mornings with sweet messages, sent her flowers at work, and continued planning elaborate dates. If anything, he seemed even more invested in her than before, his attention almost suffocating. Any lingering doubts Violet had about his behavior were carefully countered by his affectionate gestures. And yet, something in her gut told her not to ignore the warning signs. Her best friend, Melissa, was the only person she confided in about her growing fears. They sat together in a dimly lit cafe one evening, Violet stirring her tea absent-mindedly as she recounted the strange moments that had begun to pile up. Henry's apartment filled with eerie memorabilia. The way he had gotten unreasonably tense when she mentioned visiting her parents, and the unsettling feeling that he was always watching. "That's not normal, Vi," Melissa said firmly, her brows knitted together. "You have to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." Violet chewed on her lip. "I just don't want to jump to conclusions. What if it's all just coincidence?" Melissa leaned in, lowering her voice. "Coincidence doesn't explain why he somehow always knows exactly where you are. Didn't you say he showed up at your gym yesterday without you ever telling him you'd be there? And what about the locked room in his apartment?" She hesitated. "It just feels like he's hiding something." That last part sent a shiver down Violet's spine. Deep down, she knew Melissa was right. Henry was hiding something, something he didn't want her to see. The unease reached a breaking point later that week. It started with small things, little coincidences that built up like a slow-moving storm. Violet would go to a coffee shop only to find Henry already there, claiming it was just luck. She'd mentioned something in passing, only for him to bring it up in conversation days later, as if he had heard it firsthand. It felt like no matter where she went, Henry was a step ahead. The final straw came one evening when she was home alone, curled up on her couch, when her phone buzzed with a message from Henry. "Miss you already. Love that blue sweater on you tonight." Her breath caught in her throat as she stared down at her outfit. She was wearing a blue sweater, but she hadn't seen Henry all day. Her blinds were drawn, her doors locked. She hadn't posted a single picture on social media. Her fingers hovered over her phone, a rush of panic flooding her veins. Was he watching her? The idea seemed ridiculous at first. Maybe he was just guessing. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. But as she sat there, heart pounding in her chest, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Henry never guessed. He always knew. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Had he been following her? Did he somehow have access to her apartment? The thought alone made her feel sick. She needed to do something. She needed to find out the truth before it was too late. Determined, she decided to go back to his apartment the next day. She had to see what was behind that locked door. That night, Violet barely slept. Her heart pounded against her ribs every time she heard a creak in her apartment, every time her phone screen lit up. But she knew what she had to do. When she arrived at Henry's apartment the next evening, she plastered on a bright smile, pretending everything was normal. Henry greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, wrapping her in a tight hug that felt just a little too possessive. "I missed you today," he murmured against her hair. "Did you miss me?" She forced a laugh, hoping he didn't feel the way she tensed in his embrace. "Of course," she lied. "I was thinking about you all day." If he saw through her, he didn't show it. "Good," he whispered, his lips brushing against her temple. "I don't like being away from you." The words sent another chill down her spine. But she played along, waiting for her chance. As they settled into the living room, Henry excused himself to the kitchen to grab some wine. Violet seized the opportunity, her heart hammering as she tiptoed down the hall toward the locked room. The handle was still locked, just as she expected. But tonight she had come prepared. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small paperclip she had discreetly grabbed from work. She had never picked a lock in her life, but after watching a few tutorials online, she was willing to try. Her fingers trembled as she inserted the paperclip into the lock, her breath shallow as she wiggled it, listening for the telltale click. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, finally, click. Her breath hitched. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with stacks of neatly arranged boxes. At first glance, it looked almost ordinary, storage maybe. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Each box was labeled with a name, and each name was accompanied by a date. Some were from years ago, others were more recent. One of the names stood out immediately. Violet Harper, February 14th. Her own name, her own birthday. The realization sent ice through her veins. A noise behind her made her spin around, her heart nearly stopping. Henry stood in the doorway, his face eerily calm. "I was hoping you wouldn't find that," he said quietly, his eyes dark and unreadable. And then he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Isla sat frozen at her desk, her fingers hovering over her keyboard as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The email from an anonymous sender still glowed ominously on her screen. The subject line had been simple yet chilling. I see you. The message itself was no better. A single sentence that sent ice through her veins. You looked lovely in that blue dress today. The one with the little silver buttons. She hadn't worn that dress to work. She had worn it last night, to dinner with a friend. A private dinner at a quiet, candlelit restaurant where she had sat near a window, but not in plain sight. Who had seen her? Who had taken note of the details? And why were they emailing her now? Her mind raced through possibilities. A prank? A mistake? Some weird coincidence? None of those explanations felt right. Isla had always been careful, always cautious about her online presence. She had no public social media accounts, no recent posts that could have given away what she was wearing. Her stomach churned as she clicked on the sender's address. It was a string of nonsense characters, followed by a domain she didn't recognize. Fake. Untraceable. Whoever had sent it knew how to cover their tracks. Taking a shaky breath, she deleted the email, but the paranoia lingered. She couldn't focus. Every creak of the office floor, every shadow in the corner of her vision made her jump. By the time her shift ended, she had convinced herself it was nothing. She was overreacting. She had to be. But as she stepped outside into the cool evening air, her skin prickled with unease. The bus ride home was uneventful, but the sensation of being watched never faded. She kept checking over her shoulder, scanning the other passengers, but no one looked familiar. Still, her gut screamed that something was wrong. When she finally reached her apartment, she locked the door behind her and engaged the deadbolt, something she rarely bothered to do in her supposedly safe building. Then came the knock. Her breath hitched. It was soft, almost hesitant. Isla hesitated before stepping closer to the door, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She peered through the peephole. Nobody was there. Another knock. Louder this time. More insistent. She didn't move. Then her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. You really should answer the door, Isla. I hate being ignored. Panic surged through her. She stumbled backward, clutching her phone so tightly her fingers ached. The logical part of her brain screamed for her to call the police, but another part, the part consumed by fear, couldn't even process the steps to dial. Her eyes darted to the windows. Locked. Curtains drawn. No way someone could see inside. Then her phone buzzed again. A picture. Her apartment door. Taken from the hallway. Right now. Isla let out a strangled gasp and scrambled toward her bedroom. She locked the door behind her, though she knew it wouldn't do much good. Her mind raced. The fire escape. She could climb down. She could get out. But as she reached for the window, her phone vibrated once more. You're fast, but not fast enough. The picture attached was a blurry shot of her silhouette through the bedroom curtains. Her stomach lurched. He wasn't just at her door. He had moved, and he was still watching. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911, forcing herself to speak as steadily as she could. Someone's outside my apartment. They've been following me. They know where I live. Please send someone now. Stay where you are, ma'am. Keep your doors locked. Officers are on the way. She had never felt so trapped in her own home. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every second felt like an hour. Then, finally, sirens. A sharp knock at the door announced the arrival of the police. When she cracked it open, 2 uniformed officers stood there, serious and alert. They swept the hallway, checked the stairwell, scanned the security footage from the building's cameras. Nothing. Whoever had been watching her was gone. But Isla knew, deep in her gut, that this wasn't over. Whoever he wasn't finished with her yet. The weight of dread settled heavy in Oliver's chest as he stared at his phone screen, his fingers trembling over the glass surface. Another message. Another cryptic, menacing text that made his stomach twist into knots. Did you miss me, Oliver? It's rude to ignore someone who just wants to spend time with you. His pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel the beads of sweat forming on his temples, the cold realization that whoever was behind this, whoever had been tormenting him, wasn't giving up. If anything, they were getting bolder. The messages were no longer sporadic, no longer vague. They were constant, personal, and worst of all, there was something chillingly intimate about them, as if the sender knew him better than anyone else. He took a deep breath and glanced around his apartment. The curtains were drawn, the door bolted, but still, the paranoia gnawed at him. Was someone watching from the shadows? Had they already been inside? Every creak, every shift in the air made his skin crawl. He had barely slept the past few nights, too terrified of what might be lurking beyond the veil of darkness in his own home. He had tried blocking the number. It didn't work. Whoever it was always found a way back, reaching him through new numbers, unknown callers, even handwritten notes left in his mailbox. Oliver wasn't just dealing with a stalker anymore. This was something far more insidious. This person wasn't just watching from a distance, they were inside his life, weaving themselves into the very fabric of his existence. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, Oliver had had enough. With a shaky exhale, he grabbed his phone and scrolled to the one contact he had been avoiding, Detective Simon Gray. He had debated going to the police for weeks, but every time he convinced himself to make the call, doubt crept in. What if they didn't believe him? What if they brushed it off as some harmless prank? What if the person watching him was the police? But tonight, the fear of doing nothing outweighed the fear of being dismissed. He pressed the call button. The line rang. Once. Twice. A third time. Gray. The voice was sharp, professional. Oliver hesitated, his mouth suddenly dry. Detective, this is Oliver Lane. I need help. Someone's stalking me. There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by the sound of rustling papers. Lane, Gray repeated. The bartender from Willow and Company? Yeah, Oliver replied, surprised the detective remembered. Listen, I know it might sound paranoid, but this has been going on for weeks. It's getting worse. They know things about me, about my routine. They leave me messages, show up where I go. Slow down, Gray said. What kind of messages? What proof do you have? Oliver closed his eyes, inhaled sharply. He started pacing his apartment, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Texts, calls, notes, and, his breath hitched. They've been inside my apartment. A beat of silence. Then, you're sure? Yes, Oliver nearly shouted, frustration and terror bubbling over. I came home 2 nights ago and my closet door was open. I never leave it open. My things were moved. My mail was tampered with. And tonight I found a note inside my fridge. Gray cursed under his breath. All right, I want you to stay put. Lock everything. I'll come over in 20 minutes. Oliver exhaled in relief, but it was short-lived. Because just as he lowered his phone, the screen lit up with another message. His breath caught in his throat. You called the police, didn't you? Bad move, Oliver. His blood ran cold. Detective, he whispered, bringing the phone back to his ear. They know. What? They know I called you. A pause. Then a rustling sound, a shift in the detective's tone. Don't hang up. Don't move. Keep talking to me. I'm almost there. Oliver's vision blurred with panic as he slowly turned toward his apartment door. His heart pounded so violently it felt as if it would break through his ribcage. Then, in the suffocating silence of his apartment, he heard it. A soft tap. 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 Someone was outside his door. His breathing became ragged as he backed away, his fingers tightening around his phone. Detective, stay calm, Gray ordered. I'm pulling into your street now. Another tap. But this time, it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the window. Oliver swallowed a scream as he turned his head, his stomach dropping into a pit of frozen terror. A shadow moved just beyond the glass, a figure standing still against the darkened backdrop of the night. Watching. Waiting. The phone nearly slipped from his grip. The lock on his door clicked. Whoever it was, they were inside. The night was heavy with an unnatural stillness, the kind that seemed to carry a warning. Julia sat at her kitchen table, fingers curled around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The lights in her apartment were dimmed, casting long, eerie shadows that flickered against the walls. She had tried to push past the fear, to convince herself that she was safe, that the night would pass without incident. But deep down, she knew better. A shiver ran down her spine as she glanced at the security camera feed on her laptop. It had become a habit, a nervous compulsion. Every night, she checked the footage from the cameras she had installed around her building. She was desperate to regain some semblance of control, but it was futile. Each time she looked, she expected to see him. And tonight he was there. A shadowy figure stood just outside the building, half hidden by the tree line. He wasn't moving. He was just watching. Her breath caught in her throat as she zoomed in. It was impossible to make out his face, but she knew. She didn't need to see his features to recognize him. It was Lucas. He had been relentless. After their disastrous second date, Julia had tried to block him from every form of communication. Phone, email, social media, she had cut him off completely. But somehow, he always found a way back in. It started with notes slipped under her door. Then, there were the flowers left outside her apartment, always the same bouquet of white lilies. The messages were handwritten in ink so dark it was almost like it bled through the paper. "You can't ignore me forever, Julia." And now, he was standing outside her building, watching, waiting. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. Calling the police seemed logical, but she had done that before. The first time she reported Lucas, they brushed it off as a misunderstanding. The second time, they told her there was nothing they could do since he hadn't technically broken any laws. But tonight was different. As she hesitated, the motion sensor light outside flicked on. Julia's stomach twisted. Lucas stepped forward, finally revealing his face to the camera. His lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. Julia's heart pounded in her chest. She sprang up from her chair, locking all the windows and double-checking the door. She wanted to believe the locks were enough, that they could keep him out. But she had seen the way he operated. He was clever. He was patient. And he wasn't going to stop. Just as she was about to dial 911, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Her body went rigid. Her phone slipped from her grasp, landing on the floor with a soft thud. She turned toward the door, pulse hammering in her ears. Another knock. Then another. "Julia." His voice was muffled but unmistakable. It was coming from just outside her door. She backed away, her mind racing. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. How had he gotten in? The main entrance to the building was locked. There was no way he could have. Another knock. Louder this time. "Julia, I know you're in there." Terror clawed at her throat. She grabbed her phone from the floor, hands shaking as she finally dialed 911. The seconds stretched into eternity before a dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone outside my apartment," she whispered, afraid to make too much noise. "He's been stalking me for weeks, and now he's here. Can you confirm if he's trying to break in?" She glanced at the door, her breath catching as she noticed the doorknob moving. He was testing the lock. "Yes," she hissed. "He's trying to get inside. Stay where you are. Officers are on their way." The dispatcher's voice was steady, but it did little to calm her fraying nerves. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay as far away from the door as possible. The knocking stopped. Silence. Her fingers curled tighter around the phone. Was he still there? Or had he? A loud bang reverberated through the apartment. Julia let out a strangled cry as the door shook violently. He was trying to force his way in. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher instructed. "Officers are only a few minutes away." Julia squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the phone like a lifeline. A few minutes. Just a few minutes. Another bang. Then another. The doorframe groaned under the pressure. The locks were holding, for now. But she knew they wouldn't hold forever. Then suddenly footsteps. Running. Voices shouting. A commotion erupted in the hallway, followed by the sound of someone being tackled to the ground. "Ma'am!" The dispatcher's voice broke through her haze of fear. "The police have arrived." Tears welled in Julia's eyes as she slowly moved toward the peephole. Lucas was on the ground, pinned beneath 2 officers. His face was twisted with fury, his breath coming in ragged gasps. One of the officers was already snapping handcuffs around his wrists. For the first time in weeks, Julia let herself breathe. 2 days later, Julia sat in the precinct, her hands wrapped around a cup of stale coffee. She listened as the detective explained the charges being filed against Lucas: breaking and entering, harassment, attempted assault. He was going to jail. But even as relief washed over her, she knew the scars of the experience would linger. The paranoia, the fear, the constant feeling of being watched. Lucas was gone for now, but she couldn't shake the dread that had settled deep in her bones. Because some nightmares don't end just because you wake up. And some monsters don't stay locked away forever. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the distant hum of passing cars on the highway and the occasional rustle of the wind against the trees. The city skyline loomed in the distance, a maze of lights that pulsed like an artificial heartbeat against the ink-black sky. Inside a dimly lit apartment, Mira Donovan sat curled on her couch, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. She was trying to relax after a long shift at the hospital, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but the gnawing feeling in her gut wouldn't let her settle. Something felt off. It had started 2 weeks ago. At first, it was small things. Items in her apartment slightly out of place, the sound of footsteps in the hallway when no one else was home, the subtle scent of cologne that she didn't wear lingering in the air. Mira had chalked it up to exhaustion. She was a nurse used to pulling long, grueling shifts. Her mind was probably playing tricks on her. That's what she told herself. But then there were the messages. At first, they were harmless, polite, even. "You looked beautiful today. That color suits you." She had assumed they were from a patient at the hospital. Someone who had taken an interest in her, but was too shy to say anything in person. Still, it was unsettling. Her number wasn't public, and she hadn't given it to anyone new. She blocked the number, but the texts kept coming, from different numbers each time. Then things escalated. Her phone would vibrate in the middle of the night, displaying messages that made her skin crawl. "I love watching you sleep. Your bedroom window is so pretty at night." Mira had gone to the police, but without a clear suspect, there wasn't much they could do. "Change your locks," they told her. "Install security cameras." She did both. The locks were replaced, and she set up cameras around the apartment, one at the front door, one in the hallway, and one in the living room. For a few days, things were quiet. No texts, no strange sounds, no misplaced objects. Then she found the note. It was tucked inside her mailbox, sealed in an envelope with no return address. Her hands trembled as she pulled it open. The words were scrawled in uneven handwriting, the ink smudged in places, as if written in haste. "You can't ignore me forever." A chill ran down Myra's spine. She hurried inside, locking the door behind her, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Who was doing this? How were they getting so close without her seeing anything? She checked the security footage for the past 2 days, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nothing. No one had been near her mailbox. No one had entered the building who wasn't supposed to. The footage was empty. Mira spent the next few nights sleeping with her bedroom door locked, a heavy chair pushed against it just in case. The text stopped. The notes stopped. The air in her apartment felt lighter, as if the unseen presence had finally left. Until tonight, a sound, subtle, almost imperceptible, drifted from the kitchen. A shuffle, the faint creak of a floorboard. Mira froze, every muscle in her body going rigid. She wasn't alone. Slowly, she reached for the lamp on the side table, her fingers trembling as she gripped the switch. The soft glow illuminated the room, casting long shadows against the walls. Silence. Her eyes darted toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. It was dark, but she swore she saw movement, a flicker of motion just beyond the threshold. A figure, standing just outside the reach of the light. Myra's breath caught in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body refused to move. Then the whisper came. Low, gentle, close. "I told you you can't ignore me." Myra's vision blurred as the room tilted around her. Panic surged through her veins, her heartbeat a deafening drum in her ears. She lunged for her phone, but before her fingers could close around it, the lamp beside her flickered, and the power went out. Mira sat at her kitchen table, staring at the darkened screen of her phone. Her fingers hovered over the call log, debating whether to dial again. The police dispatcher had assured her they would send someone to check the area, but her gut told her it wasn't enough. There had been something about the way that shadowy figure stood at her doorstep, too still, too patient. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were waiting. A shiver rolled down her spine as she glanced toward the front window. The porch light flickered slightly, casting long shadows that stretched eerily across the wooden planks outside. The logical part of her mind told her she was overreacting. Maybe it had been some confused drunk or a neighbor who lost their way in the dark. And yet, a deeper, primal part of her knew better. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stand. She couldn't just sit here paralyzed. Checking the locks one more time, she grabbed the heaviest flashlight she owned from the kitchen drawer and made her way cautiously toward the front door. The police might take their time, but she wouldn't just sit here defenseless. As she reached the peephole, her stomach twisted into knots. Forcing herself to look, she peered through the small glass circle. Nothing. The porch was empty. Letting out a shaky exhale, she hesitated for a few moments before unlocking the door, just enough to peek outside. The crisp night air greeted her, carrying the scent of damp earth and autumn leaves. The street was empty, the silence stretching out unnervingly. Just as she was about to close the door, a glint caught her eye. Something was lying on her doormat. A small, plain envelope. Myra's pulse quickened. Her eyes darted down the street, scanning for movement, but everything remained eerily still. Steeling herself, she crouched down and picked up the envelope. It was light, the paper crinkling under her fingertips. There was no name, no return address, just her own address written in neat, precise handwriting. Her first instinct was to toss it aside, but curiosity got the better of her. She stepped back inside, locked the door, and carefully peeled open the flap. A single note, typed not handwritten, lay inside. The message was simple, but it sent an ice-cold wave of fear through her veins. "I see you." The words were stark against the white paper, deliberate, menacing. Mira felt her breath hitch. Her hands trembled as she read and reread the note. Someone had been watching her. Not just tonight, but for who knows how long. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was this a prank? Had someone from work decided to pull a cruel joke? Or was this something much worse? She forced herself to think logically. If someone had left this while she was inside, it meant they had been incredibly quiet. And it meant they were close. A sharp knock at the door made her nearly jump out of her skin. She spun around, heart hammering, gripping the flashlight so tightly her knuckles turned white. She inched toward the peephole, every nerve in her body screaming at her not to look, but she had to know. She peered through the glass. This time there was someone there, but it wasn't the shadowy figure from before. It was the police. Relief flooded her system as she yanked open the door. A uniformed officer stood on her porch, a polite but unreadable expression on his face. His badge read Officer Calloway. "Miss Brighton?" he asked. Mira nodded, still clutching the note in one shaking hand. "We got your call about a prowler," he continued. "We checked the neighborhood, but didn't find anything unusual. Do you mind telling me exactly what happened?" Wordlessly, Mira handed him the note. He took it, reading it under the porch light before glancing back at her, his jaw tightening slightly. He seemed concerned, but not surprised. "Have you received anything like this before?" he asked, lowering his voice. "No," Mira admitted. "But someone was here. I saw them. They left this." Officer Calloway nodded. "I believe you," he said simply. "It's possible this is a one-time thing, but we need to be cautious. Do you have security cameras?" Mira shook her head. "I've been meaning to get one." He pulled out a small notebook, jotting something down. "I'd recommend installing one as soon as possible. For now, I'll have a patrol car swing by a few times tonight to keep an eye on things. If anything else happens, anything at all, you call us immediately." She nodded, clutching her arms around herself as the cold air seeped into her bones. "Do you think this is someone I know?" she asked hesitantly. Calloway studied her for a moment before answering. "Hard to say, but notes like this, they're meant to scare you. Whoever did this wants you to feel vulnerable." Mira swallowed hard, the reality of the situation settling deeper. Vulnerable. That was exactly how she felt. "I'll be fine," she murmured, more to convince herself than anyone else. The officer gave her a reassuring nod before stepping back toward his patrol car. "Lock up tight, and keep your phone close." Mira watched as he pulled away, disappearing down the street, leaving her alone once more. As soon as she shut the door, she triple-checked the locks and turned off all the lights, plunging the house into darkness. Maybe if she couldn't see outside, whoever was watching wouldn't see her either. The envelope still lay on the table, the words "I see you" glaring up at her in the dim glow of the streetlight outside. Her mind repeated the officer's words. Notes like this are meant to scare you. It was working. The following morning, Clara hesitated before stepping out of her apartment. She had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by the messages, the eerie sensation of being watched, and the lingering feeling that something wasn't right. She wanted to believe it was just her imagination running wild, but deep down she knew better. Her commute to work was uneventful, but as she reached the coffee shop near her office, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The barista, A friendly young woman who usually greeted her by name looked at her with an odd expression. "Hey, Clara, did you forget something last night?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Clara blinked. "What do you mean?" "You came in pretty late," the barista said, lowering her voice. "Ordered your usual, but you seemed off. You didn't say much, just paid and left. I thought you were sick or something." Clara's stomach turned. She hadn't been here last night. In fact, she hadn't left her apartment after she got home. Her hands tightened around her cup, her mind racing. Was this some kind of mistake? A coincidence? Or was someone pretending to be her? At work, she found herself distracted, checking over her shoulder constantly, expecting to find him there, her date from the other night, whose gaze had left her skin crawling. Every notification on her phone made her heart jump. She even considered telling someone, maybe HR or a coworker, but what could she say? That she had a bad feeling? That someone had walked into a cafe pretending to be her? She shook off the thoughts, determined to focus on her work, but when she checked her email, her breath caught in her throat. A message from an unknown sender, just one line. "You're hard to find when you don't want to be, Clara." Her heart pounded so violently she could hear it in her ears. Her hands trembled as she closed her laptop. This wasn't normal anymore. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching her, and they wanted her to know it. By lunchtime, Clara had made up her mind. She was going to call the police. Maybe they wouldn't take it seriously, but she had to try. She stepped out of the office, her phone clutched in her hand, and as she walked toward the main street, she noticed a figure standing across the road. He was dressed in dark clothes, standing too still, too rigid, his face partially obscured by the shadow of a nearby building. But even from a distance, Clara knew. It was him, the man from the date, the one who had been too intense, who had lingered too long, who had made her feel like prey. Her breath hitched. He wasn't just watching her now. He was following her. Clara turned on her heel and forced herself to walk, not run, back inside the office building, her pulse hammering in her ears. The walls of her workplace suddenly felt like the only safe place in the world. But for how long? Her stalker had made his presence known, and he wasn't going to stop. The next few days felt like an endless cycle of paranoia and fear. Camille found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, her anxiety heightened by the eerie sensation that she was being watched. Every time she stepped out of her apartment, every shadow seemed darker, every sound sharper. She barely slept, her nights filled with tossing and turning, her mind replaying every unsettling moment with Daniel over and over again. Despite her gut instincts screaming at her to cut off all contact, Daniel continued to reach out. His texts became more frequent, his calls more persistent. He started sending long messages apologizing for his behavior, blaming stress, lack of sleep, and even past relationships for his overbearing attitude. One message, in particular, sent a chill down Camille's spine. "I can't stop thinking about you. I know I was too intense, but that's only because I feel like we're meant to be. Please, let's talk. I promise I'll be better. I just need to see you again." The desperation in his words was unsettling, but what truly terrified her was that Daniel seemed utterly convinced they had a connection that she never felt. She stopped responding, hoping he would take the hint. But silence only seemed to make things worse. The messages changed from remorseful to accusatory, then back to apologetic in a loop that felt unending. One night, as she lay in bed scrolling through her phone, a text popped up that sent a wave of cold terror through her body. "I know you're home. I saw your lights turn off." Camille's heart stopped. She immediately sat up, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted toward the window. She lived on the third floor of her apartment building. How could he see her lights? She scrambled out of bed, checking every lock, every window. The curtains were drawn, and yet she still felt utterly exposed. Had he been watching her? How long had he been outside? Panic set in, and for the first time, she felt real fear grip her in a way she never had before. That was the moment she knew she had to take action. Taking action. The next morning, Camille went to the police station. She explained everything, how they had met, how the date had gone from odd to terrifying, and how his persistence had escalated into stalking behavior. The officer taking her statement was sympathetic, but firm. "We can file a report, but unless he physically harms you or threatens violence, there's not much we can do right now," the officer said. Camille felt a mix of relief and frustration. She was doing what she was supposed to, seeking help before things got worse, but it still felt like not enough. The officer advised her to block Daniel on all platforms, avoid contact, and inform friends and neighbors about the situation. Feeling somewhat reassured but still uneasy, Camille returned home and immediately blocked Daniel's number. She locked all her doors, double-checked the windows, and even let her neighbor, Mrs. Patel, know about the situation in case anything suspicious happened. Days passed, and for a while there was silence. No texts, no calls, no sign of Daniel anywhere. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had given up. But then, one evening, as she arrived home from work, she noticed something tucked into her doorframe. A single white rose with a note attached. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the note. "I'm not going anywhere." A deep, sinking dread settled in her stomach. Daniel wasn't gone. He was just waiting. The next morning, Olivia awoke with an uneasy feeling in her chest. The events of the previous night played over in her mind like a fragmented dream, but the bruises on her wrist and the red marks on her ankle confirmed that it had been all too real. She sat up in bed, the faint light of dawn filtering through her curtains, illuminating the ominous message scrawled across her mirror in what appeared to be red lipstick. "You can't run forever." Her heart pounded as she bolted upright, scanning the room for any signs of forced entry. Nothing. The door was locked, the windows shut tight. How had he gotten in? Or worse, had he ever left? A deep chill ran down her spine. Determined not to let fear paralyze her, Olivia grabbed her phone and dialed the police. For the first time, she truly felt like she was in danger. The officers arrived promptly, and after a brief inspection, they found no signs of a break-in. They took her statement but, without concrete evidence, could do little more than advise her to be careful. One officer suggested she stay with a friend for a few nights, just in case. Olivia didn't need to be told twice. She packed a bag and called her best friend, Jenna, who immediately insisted she come over. Jenna's apartment was in a secure building with a doorman and security cameras. Surely, that would be enough to keep her safe. Olivia exhaled shakily as she locked her apartment behind her, praying that she was finally taking the right steps. But as she turned to leave, her stomach twisted into knots. On the floor, just outside her apartment door, was a single white rose. That night, in the safety of Jenna's home, Olivia tried to rationalize everything. Perhaps the lipstick message was an old prank she had forgotten about. Maybe she had left the rose outside herself and simply didn't remember. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself, the creeping paranoia wouldn't go away. Jenna tried to cheer her up with a movie and some wine, but Olivia couldn't relax. The feeling of being watched was suffocating, like unseen eyes were constantly tracking her every move. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. She almost didn't want to look, but curiosity got the better of her. "Unknown number. You can't hide, Olivia. I'll always find you," she gasped, her grip tightening on the phone as a cold sweat broke out across her skin. Jenna immediately took the phone from her hands, checking the message before looking up with a mix of concern and anger. "This guy is sick," Jenna hissed. "We're going to the police first thing in the morning. You're staying with me until they catch this freak." But Olivia wasn't sure there would be a morning. The hours dragged on, each shadow morphing into something sinister. At 2:37 a.m., Olivia was jolted awake by a noise, soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. She turned her head slowly, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing on the fire escape outside the fifth-floor window, was a silhouette, a tall, dark figure unmoving, watching. Jenna, stirred by Olivia's sharp intake of breath, groggily sat up. "Liv? What's?" She followed Olivia's gaze, and within seconds, they were both on their feet, backing away from the window. Jenna grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but before she could hit call, the figure outside slammed a fist against the glass, the loud thud reverberating through the room. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the figure turned and vanished into the night. The police arrived within minutes, searching the building and surrounding area, but the intruder was nowhere to be found. The only evidence left behind was a single handprint smudged on the window pane, too distorted to be useful. The police took Olivia's case much more seriously after that. They advised her to move, change her number, and take every precaution possible. But Olivia knew deep down that no matter where she went, he would always find her. 2 weeks later, Olivia was gone. She had packed up and left town, disappearing without a trace. No social media updates, no contact with friends or family, just an empty apartment and an abandoned life. Jenna tried to call, but the number was disconnected. The police followed up, but there was nothing to follow. It was as if Olivia had never existed. And yet, just a few weeks after her disappearance, Jenna received an envelope in the mail. No return address, no postage stamp. Just her name, handwritten in perfect script. Inside was a single Polaroid. A picture of Olivia, looking directly at the camera, her face eerily blank. Behind her, a tall figure stood, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. There was only one word written at the bottom of the photo. Mine.